Hi everyone, in today's video I will be talking how God prepared me for the loss of my daughter. And of course everything is hindsight 2020, so now I can place all the events, all the experiences leading to the path of her passing away. And maybe in my story you will recognize a thing or two when it came down to your loved one that is now in heaven. So let's begin. So when my daughter was 1 year old, I started to have a repeating vision. And in this vision, I would see my daughter laying in her bed, and I would open her bedroom door, and she had passed away in her bedroom. And I would see this repeating vision during maybe 2 or 3 years, up until the time that she would eventually pass away at the age of 4. So because of this repeating vision, I always had this deep inner knowing that it would actually happen. It was as if it was my soul knowing. And many doctors, they have checked my child, they had to help her because she was always struggling with her health, but they never really looked further. Many symptoms were missed. So in this case, unconsciously, because I saw this repeating vision, and I knew deep inside of me, it was a soul knowing that this eventually would happen, because I have had experienced that before with other visions, and they came true as well. So what happened was that I started to unconsciously prepare, because in my conscious mind, of course, I don't want to believe that my daughter is actually going to pass away. And I did everything that I could to save her. So what started to happen was that I started to follow mothers on Instagram who had lost a child themselves. And I started to follow all these accounts of all these grieving parents and looking at their children and also seeing how much light those children were carrying. It was always so obvious to me that I thought all these children that are suffering now, and they had a disease, for example, and they were about to pass, I always thought they have this angelic glow around them. They looked so light. They were such old souls and light beings. And I didn't even consciously was aware of that, but I just somehow felt it. What an angelic, beautiful little child. And later I would see that also in my own daughter. I could see that she was such an old soul and such a very bright little child. And many people also called her a little angel. And that is also how I thought of those other children that were to pass. So that was already something very incredible to see about those children. So I also started to watch many documentaries and about grief and how people were starting to continue their life after such great loss, because I could see the pain of all those parents that had lost a child. So whilst I was part-time working, a single mother taking care of my child, she was sick a lot, so we had to go in and out of hospitals, and the doctors were always treating her symptoms, right? But they never investigated further, although I kept asking them. I was the one telling them, I think something is really, really wrong. But then the blood results would turn out to be okay. They did a CT scan, that was fine. So eventually it always came down to, she is a little sensitive. So unconsciously, I was preparing myself, and with following these accounts, with watching these documentaries, and I could always feel the pain of those parents, because now I was a mother myself and I could not imagine losing her, right? And then what happened was that I saw a documentary, and my friend said, hey, I have a book written by the woman, and she gave me that book, and I still have it. So this was years before my daughter would eventually pass, and it was a book by Ada de Jong, and she had lost her entire family whilst climbing the mountains in Italy. So she had lost 3 children and her husband. And that story gripped me so much, because I thought, how in the world can this woman still function and continue, and looking for the meaning of all of this and for the meaning of her life. And yeah, so I was subconsciously always looking for the subject of grief and loss and how to continue and what is the purpose of our lives. And of course, that has expanded 100-fold after my daughter passed away. And then a strange thing also happened, because child loss is quite rare in the Western world. I don't know of anybody else. But when my daughter was still so young, my colleague, who was also my friend, suddenly lost her son. And this came out of the blue. And whilst being with her and seeing how they were dealing with that, how they were grieving and also trying to continue life, now when I look back on it, it was as if she was already preparing me for what would come a few years later into my life. The things that doctors would do, for example, when she would say that, hey, I have very dark thoughts, I don't know if I can continue like this, they would still give her 100 sleeping pills. Things like that, that would actually also happen to me. Even after I tried to unalive myself, they would still give me very high doses of medicine that would easily take my life. And in that moment, I already never understood that how can you give a woman that has very dark thoughts all these pills, right? It was already so strange to me, and I spoke about it with her, but also about all the reactions from the people around her. Of course, the people that you are very close to, and even they can still surprise you, right? Sometimes a stranger can surprise you, or somebody you didn't speak to for a long time, with being there for you in the way that you need it. And there were also people in her life that would also later happen to me. You were not very involved with them, but you just know them from somewhere. And those people, what she would already tell me that, yeah, well, what will happen is that they start to avoid you because they don't even know what to say. So they will start to avoid you. And then I would tell her that, oh my gosh, I don't even understand how people can do that. You lost your child, and then it's so big for them, apparently, that they don't know how to react. So they just ignore you, and then you feel even more alone. So I always try to be there for her and mention her child's name, also saying his name, right? Because I know how important that is. And especially now I'm going through it myself. I mean, even when your child is gone or your loved one is gone, they are still very much part of your mind and your heart. So you still want to talk about them. Like you used to when they were still around, right? So it is such a strange experience that everything that she was going through and was telling me about, and all these different waves of people and like the doctors around it, or she also had the police involved. And I also had that because they didn't understand in Finland yet, where the country where I live in, what hospice at home was. So they didn't understand what had happened when they saw all these morphine and fentanyl and oxygen tanks. So there was a whole police investigation, and she had that happen as well. So all those steps that she was going through, later on I would be going through. So as you can imagine, already so many things had happened and had passed, and I would eventually be the one experiencing all of them, all these mothers on Instagram, all these documentaries that I watched, the books that I have read, the story of my friend who had lost her son, that would eventually become my life. What later would also turn out to be almost like a blessing in disguise was my experience in the work in the field of psychiatry. Because I worked for 8 years in psychiatry, I knew everything about observing people and also making very accurate, truthful notes from an objective point of view. So, because I've done all this work with so many different people, and I also say I have the great discernment of God, where I can just see through the veil and see the truth for what it is. And I have done this with my own child as well. That since she was born and she started to get sick, I made all these notes of all the facts that were happening, and I saw them clear as day. And it was as if I felt so alone in this, because it felt as if I was the only one seeing all the time that it was not going well. She was not doing well. She was not developing well. She was not growing well. All those little things. But because I had this whole list from all the dates and all the sicknesses and illnesses and all the problems that she was encountering, I would present that list to the hospital, to the doctors, to the pediatricians, her team that was like involved with her, and they would always brush it off somehow. And later on, all these symptoms that I have been writing down for years, well, she passed when she was 4 years old, so pretty much up until that age, were all connected to her heart disease that would eventually be the death of her. So in the end, I saw it exactly for what it was. I saw all the signs and symptoms. And the most incredible thing, what I can also say about this, is that her father said it actually to me, Lumi's dad. He said it was as if God prevented us from understanding that it was her heart. And it made sense because I Googled and Googled day and night to find answers. Like, what is going on with my child? Why is she suffering so much? And why does she have all these diseases continuously? I would present it to the doctors. They would have their own hypotheses. And we would all speak about it also with the family and sometimes also with friends. And even I had this arrhythmia from the heart since I was 20. I had to go sometimes to a cardiologist, and nobody knew what was wrong with my heart, but they said, no, it's all fine. We're not going to investigate it even further. So even I had this heart problem, and it's running in my family. And then suddenly it turns out that my child was suffering from a heart disease as well, but then something else, something different. So it was as if literally this was the plan. I saw the vision of my daughter passing away for years. It was with a reason. I started to prepare for that. I worked in a field where I had quite a lot of knowledge also from medicine, and that would eventually help a lot as well. So all these little tiny roads, all these little experiences, all these little things happening, and nobody thought of the heart. Not the doctors, not me, not my family, even though there were heart problems. We thought of all the other organs. We thought of all other possibilities. But like Lumi's father said, it was as if it was blocked from us because this was part of a greater plan. And trust me, I know how this sounds as well, because I know how horrible it is if your child dies. I live this every single day. It has been now 19 months for me, but because, and maybe you can see that in other videos on my channel, I have seen so many other things, and the purpose of this and other visions that I know that there is a higher plan. And that is why I started this YouTube channel, right? So what was also interesting was that we were living, and I was working in Holland. I had most of my family there and all of my amazing friends, and we just had a good life, but she was always sick. And then suddenly, what I also feel, it was Holy Spirit, it was God, who it was, maybe the angels, that suddenly, when I was standing there in my living room, I heard this voice loud and clear saying that she will not survive when you continue to live here. And I immediately knew that my child would pass away if we will stay here. Because somehow I understood there was something very wrong staying in this place. She was sick every second week of her life. Well, that's not okay. But she looks very fine and beautiful and sparkling and happy, and she was an amazing child. So, but I knew deep down they were correct. She will not survive if we continue to live here. So that is where the move to Finland started to happen. It was something that I was wanting to do for a long time, but I didn't want to leave my whole world behind. I had everything in Holland, but I tried to save my child as best as I could. So we moved to Finland. And the most beautiful thing is what happened here, because we live at the forest, is that finally, for the first time ever, she got color in her face. She got pink cheeks. She barely got sick anymore. And now we understand why. Because of her heart condition, this restrictive cardiomyopathy, but we would find out way too late. Because of this heart condition, she was always lacking oxygen. And when you live at the wild forest in Finland, then you have so much fresh air and so much oxygen. So Lumi, my daughter, was suddenly thriving. So everything seemed to be perfect and it felt like a new beginning. But it was a new beginning in one way, but it would also be the end. I made a picture of her, and this is what I heard from many other parents as well that had lost a child, that they made a picture a day before, a few days before of their child, and that they looked at this picture and thought, wow, my child literally looks like an angel. And I will show you the picture that I made of her where I literally thought, wow, she looks like an angel. There was suddenly this even more beautiful glow around her. And it was incredible to hear this from other people as well that were going through the same, that they had it also happening to them. And yeah, I say, because, you know, heaven knows when things are about to happen. The angels are very much involved. And maybe they were already there with her on the 22nd of June, surrounding her more, protecting her more. Because the next day we were out for lunch and we had our food in a beautiful little harbor town. And this beautiful little harbor town, what also many people have experienced themselves, and what I heard, is that before this tragedy would strike, that it was as if time stood still. And that is also what happened to me and my child when we were sitting there by the waterside, looking at the boats, and the sky was blue and the sun was shining. And I was not checking my phone for something. I was not distracted. Me and her were fully in the present moment, in the silence, looking around us and admiring the weather, the boats, the nature, the birds. And it was literally as if time stood still. And I also say now that this moment, it was like an exaggerated moment of peace and love for you to experience before your child or your loved one would be gone. And I'm curious if you have that experience as well. If you now think about it, the last time when you saw your loved one, or you suddenly took a picture of that person that you usually never do, and then they would pass away, or that you shared this very special moment together before something horrible would happen. But anyways, after lunch, she would then have her heart failure. She just dropped dead on the ground. And because of my work experience, where I had to know first aid, I had so many diplomas in first aid help, I was able to resuscitate my own child. So even that experience, even that knowledge that I also had would save her life in that moment. And from there on, we would receive the diagnosis, because then they finally understood here that, yes, something is really wrong now. And that's where she was diagnosed. And 7 weeks later, she was dead. So that is how everything would unfold. So, yeah, anyways, I think this is the story that I wanted to share now, that you are never alone. So God is always there. He sees everything, but also all the angels and your ancestors and the people that have passed, and even your pets that have passed. And there are so many light beings around you that are trying to help you going forward. But the only thing you have to do is to open your heart for it and to trust or believe that it's possible. If you close your heart and your mind and you think that, no, it's not there, it's very difficult for them to come through. Yeah, I'm very curious about your story and about your loved one, but no, they're also always there. And they're very happy. So they're all very well and fine up there in heaven, together with all the other people that have passed. So, yeah, anyways, I wish you all well, and I will see you in the next video. Take care and God bless.